The Newcomer, page 41, September 19th, 1987. You may be wondering how I ended up here. Man, it's a long story. I'll try to summarize, for to do this thing justice would take a book, and that ain't gonna fit on toilet paper. Besides, if I could write it, the publishers would be women, the editors would be women, and considering the subject matter, I doubt I'd even get an agent. Bertha's varicose veins flooded with blood with every step that she took. Normally the pain would slow her down, but she couldn't allow her handicap from keeping her from safe room. It was vital that she met with Terry one more time. Though the practice of teaching charges had been eliminated a half-century ago, when the older charges questions had led to an bolted revolt, Bertha was Terry's reading teacher. In the 5 years that she'd been teaching him, there had never been a close call of discovery, and this worried her. There should have been at least one incident that needed to be covered up. Now she feared that the stress of indoctrination would make Terry slip and reveal their secret. Turning into the hall of safe rooms, she froze. Terry was leaving his room. Bertha was afraid to move as she watched the fetching matrix punch in the code to lock the door. A fidgeting Terry was looking about and saw Bertha. She hurried her finger to her lips and stole back around the corner, praying that her presence had been detected by the serving matrix. Though the temptation was unbearable, she didn't peek back around the corner before hurrying away. Terry had seen Bertha, and he had seen the sign. The caution in Old's eyes made him wonder if the meeting with the Dr. Matrix was about the lessons, for the intensity of Old's warning had brought back memories of the first lesson. Terry had been in safe room for a long time. He didn't know it, but it had been 8 years since he'd been taken from the nursery. He still missed the other charges in the nursing matrices, and wondering what he had done so bad to be put there, all alone, for so long. He just asked his toilet matrix that question again, and she admonished him again for doing so. Alone, with a stinging pain of guilt, his door wall opened and Bertha peeked in. Terry was afraid of her because he didn't have a service to connect with her. Then he became engrossed by the color of her hair. It was snowy white, like milk, and reminded him of the pitcher puffs that he saw outside of his window. He wondered if that was where she had come from, for such was the comfort he felt from her smiling eyes. Seeing his fear diminish, Bertha entered his room. Once inside and the door locked, she reached into a pocket of her long black gown and pulled out a nursery block. Terry had a vague memory of these things. She gently tossed it across the floor towards him. As it tumbled, Terry noticed that the block was different from those in the nursery. It stopped near him, and he reached over to pick it up. The block had a smudgy color on it, the slit like the picture window before the bright comes. He traced his finger along what made the block different from those in the nursery. His finger went up at an angle, then down another angle. As he pushed his finger across a path that joined the angles, the intruder spoke. "That's the letter A, Terry." Jolted by the voice, he dropped the block. Smiling while reaching into her pocket, Bertha pulled out another block and tossed it towards him. When Terry picked it up, he discovered that it had a different picture on it. "That's an apple, Terry. Apple starts with the letter A. Can you say A?" Terry was afraid to answer, not only because he didn't know this person, but because he'd recently been reminded that it was against the way to speak to matrices. Expecting reluctance, Bertha tossed his last block to him. Without letting go of the apple block, he picked up the new one. It had the same picture on it as the first one. Realizing this, he dropped the apple block and picked up the other A one. Putting the two A squares together, he showed them to the matrix. "Very good, Terry," she said. "They are the same. They are both the letter A." Bertha was amazed how quickly this male child was learning. She didn't want to leave, but knew that their lesson needed to be brief. Watching Terry stock the blocks, she let the charge play for a moment and spoke. "I have to go now, Terry. Would you like me to come back?" He looked up from the tower that he made, but didn't answer. "If you want me to come back," Bertha said, "then you need to hand the blocks back to me." Terry looked down at the blocks. For the first time since being put in safe room, he was given a choice. For the first time since being in safe room, he had someone to play with. And the first time ever, he knew that he needed to speak his mind. He was wildly confused. He did not want to give up the blocks. He did not want the matrix to leave. He looked up at the smiling matrix and down at his tower. He scooped up all 3 blocks and stood up. He knew that he wanted this matrix to come back more than he wanted to keep the blocks, for this matrix was like the nursery matrixes, where she had spoken to him with a smile. Bravely, he brought the blocks over to her. Without a word, she accepted them, put them back into her pocket, and then knelt down beside Terry. "Thank you," she said. "I will bring more blocks when I come back." Terry smiled. "Now," she said, "this is very important. You can never tell the other matrices that I was here. If you do, then I won't be able to come back." Terry frowned. This matrix was telling him to keep a shh. Terry was told never to keep a shh. He didn't answer. "Terry," Bertha asked, "do you understand me?" Terry understood, but Terry was afraid. He didn't answer. Bertha was becoming nervous and was worried that the charge had been trained too well by the matrixes. She thought that she had waited too long to come to him. She tried not to allay her fears. "Terry, do you want me to come back?" Terry nodded slightly. "Then you cannot tell." That was the glitch. Whom should he trust? The matrixes had always told him that keeping a shh could hurt him, but this didn't hurt. Maybe this was a good shush. Maybe this was a shush like when he had the sickness and the matrixes tried to make him feel better. They'd make the shh sound then and tell him to stop crying. This shush sound made him feel like that. Terry put his finger to his pursed lips. Bertha exhaled.